I'm investigative journalist Molly Barrows. For years, I've covered the stories that made headlines in Northwest Florida and all along the Gulf Coast. Murders, missing persons, and mysteries of all kinds. These cases are far from over for many victims because the full story has yet to surface. Join me for Gulf Coast Confidential, where I dive into the saltier side of the South and expose the lies, greed, and corruption that often weighs down the truth. It's time to turn the tide and get a shot at justice. Hi, I'm Molly Barrows, a longtime reporter in Florida's Panhandle, and welcome to my investigative series, Gulf Coast Confidential, where we dive into the saltier stories that surface in Northwest Florida and all along the Gulf of Mexico. My co-host is Pam Hill. Pam, thanks as always for joining us.
Thank you for having me, Molly.
Absolutely. And for those who are regular listeners to Gulf Coast Confidential, then you know who Pam is. But for those who may be joining us for the first time, Pam has a unique perspective on a lot of the cases that we discuss on Gulf Coast Confidential because Pam's sister was killed by her son, Pam's nephew, on Christmas Eve 2013, so almost 10 years ago now. She's also a pharmacist, and as a result of what she's experienced, she is a grief and loneliness researcher. So again, she has a unique perspective on a lot of the cases that we talk about because here on Gulf Coast Confidential, we try to talk a lot about the victim's point of view, and the victim oftentimes are the families of the victims, as well as the victims, of course. So in this episode called Beauty Buyer Beware, we're talking about a story that originated from right here on the Gulf Coast and is now making national headlines. I'll tell you a little bit about it. The death of a Gulf Breeze plastic surgeon's wife is under investigation now by the Santa Rosa County Sheriff's Office here in Northwest Florida. According to Hillary Brown's family, she went into cardiac arrest on November 21st while her husband, Dr. Ben Brown, was performing several procedures on her in his Gulf Breeze office. Hillary Brown's family said she was taken off life support a week later because she had gone without oxygen to her brain for too long, and as a result, they had to take her off life support and her organs were donated. So she was only 33 years old. She is a mother of 3 young children by a previous marriage. The children are ages 4 to 8. And she and Ben Brown, who is 40, well, they married about a year ago, but according to his social media, they were a couple a year before that. So they've been together about 2 years. And they have a big, beautiful house in the Tiger Point area of Gulf Breeze on the water. And by all accounts, before this story broke, he had a very successful business. He was well known in the community, had received awards and recognitions. And but what we're finding out now is that a lot of people are saying that they were not getting the best care when they had gone to see Ben Brown. And the death of his wife has sort of brought a lot of these issues to light. And the community has really started to take a look at this case. And this death investigation is new. This whole story is basically still breaking to a great extent. We're still learning a lot about it. And I've spent the last few days really digging into it, talking to a lot of people, talking to Hillary Brown's family, talking to victims who say that they are victims of Dr. Ben Brown, that they didn't get the kind of care and the plastic surgery procedures that they were intending to get. The results were not what they wanted, and as a result, that they had serious health problems. In some cases, some of the victims that I've talked to, some of the women that I talked to, say that they nearly died, and then some weren't as severe, but others, but they have permanent disabilities. And the pictures that I've seen and the stories that I've heard, it's when something goes wrong, it can really go wrong. And it's a sad situation all the way around. And certainly what brought all this to light is the death of Dr. Brown's wife, Hillary Brown. Pam, why do you think this case has garnered so much attention in the community and even across the country now?
Because it's relatable. And first of all, I want to offer our condolences to the Hillary's family.
Yes.
And to Ben Brown also. I think grief is universal. Losing someone's universal. We've all had some sort of relationship with somebody, if not ourselves, where we've had surgery. We sign a little consent form, and you start reading it. reading through it, it's like, your sign there, you could die from this. So I think it's just relatable. It's regular people. It's regular families. He's a doctor, a very handsome man, a plastic surgeon. What's the biggest movie like right now? Barbie. We're getting back into our pink. It's nice to be feminine. It's nice to feel curvy and have your shapes and be in shape. And it's just what women do.
Absolutely. Who doesn't want to be pretty? Who doesn't want to look their best?
So, I think it is that there, but for the grace of God go I, it could happen. Because all these surgery centers, look, we just spent the last 2 years educating our children through Zoom, doing all kind of things online, quick fix of everything. But some things are not a quick fix. This is an elective procedure typically, but anything can go wrong. There's a predictable outcome that there can be mistakes and there can be complications. So we trust that the surgeons and doctors and healthcare professionals keep that in mind, because you cannot go in there and not realize that things could go south real fast. What is my standard operating procedure on that?
Right. And there are rules and regulations from the medical community, from the state, from federal guidelines that determine a lot of that behavior too. And again, this is a developing case, and her death is under investigation. But I talked to Hillary Brown's dad, Marty Ellington. He and his wife, Dixie, Hillary's mom, they're originally from actually Oxford, Mississippi, but they live in Texas now. He's an electrical engineer. He has a successful electrical business in Houston, and they live outside of Houston in Conroe. And of course, no parent wants to get that call. But, he said that's how they essentially found out. They got the call from Ben saying, you need to get here as fast as you can. She's in the hospital. And it's devastating. I've interviewed very many people, as you know. You and I connected. We met when you reached out to me about your sister's murder, and actually death, I should say, because he was found not guilty by reason of insanity. So, criminally speaking, he's been found not guilty. But you understand what it's like to grieve. You understand what it's like to be in that shock state when something like this happens. And really, in this case, it even happened around the same time of year. And Christmas will never be the same again for the Ellingtons either. They've now lost their daughter, and it's heartbreaking. But I think on top of it, much like yourself, there's this feeling of, oh my gosh, I can't believe this is happening. I can't believe this is in the national news. So was your story. Yours also went international. Sharon Adelot's death went international because it was just so heinous. It was a brutal death on her doorstep by her own son on one of the holiest nights of the Christian calendar, Christmas Eve. So it was shocking and horrible at the same time. And I think to some extent, they're dealing with this too. It's all very real. It's all very new, and they don't understand what happened either.
Well, I'm so grateful that they have reached out to you, because right after Sharon was killed, I probably spent 2 or 3 years just wondering, who can I talk to, who can handle this, who can help me? Because it was almost like, I'm not going to say, oh, well, that's unfortunate that happened. There's so many feelings and so much going on. Think once you get involved with the legal system with grief is one thing. Grief is basically love with nowhere to go. And also grief is the receipt that we hold that we loved someone. So there we go with those two things, and you're in the middle of legal or things that may have gone wrong. It's much easier to process grief when you can expect it, or even I think I could process grief if my sister fell out of an airplane.
A clean break, if you will.
Instead of at the hands of someone else. When it's like, how dare you take their life? And I'm not saying that Ben did that on purpose. I don't think it was his intention to do that. But we have to look at behavior. We can't just run around this world doing any and everything that we want to. There are rules to follow. There are guidelines. There are ethics. And there are things. Just because you can doesn't mean that you can.
You should.
Should, right. So I think that we have to practice in a safe manner. It's someone's life. The cost of doing business cannot be somebody's life.
That's exactly right. Well, and for folks who aren't necessarily familiar with this case, I'll fill you in a little bit about what Mr. Ellington told me, Marty Ellington. He said, when he got that call, get here as fast as you can. They left their home. They hurried to Florida, where they lived, as I mentioned, in Gulf Breeze. And if you're not familiar with the Panhandle of Florida, it is gorgeous. We have sugar white beaches, emerald shores, and Gulf Breeze, Florida is a bedroom community of Pensacola. Pensacola is the western gate to the Sunshine State, as one of our former mayors used to say. And not only do we get a lot of tourists here, but, a lot of people come here to settle because it is a beautiful place to live, and it's a laid-back lifestyle. It's Florida, but it's still the buckle of the Bible Belt. It has a real southern down-home feel. And, it's easy to get around, and it's also a posh community in Gulf Breeze. So it's, not necessarily in the thick of things in Pensacola, where you have your downtown, which is vibrant and fun and that sort of thing. But it's on the outskirts, good schools, a wealthier community, and they lived in a very beautiful community, surrounded by great neighbors. And again, by all accounts, he had a successful practice. And I am also hearing from patients who said that he did do great procedures on them, that they also were happy with the work that he did. But it's I've just heard from many, many women who have different stories to tell. And I think there's a whole nother story there as to, which I am digging into and will soon have out. But I think I have to get some more answers from the state of Florida as far as what guidelines do you expect? I need to talk to experts in the medical community who are familiar with plastic surgery, as well as what some of these rules and regulations are. When and where do you perform certain kind of surgical procedures? When and where do you need to have certain kind of specially trained people there with you? Because these are the kinds of questions that her parents are asking. They're devastated, of course. She was beautiful. If you look at Hillary Brown's pictures on Facebook and the ones that her parents provided, she is vibrant. They said she was full of fire and energy since she was a girl, that, you weren't going to tell her no. She wouldn't take no for an answer. She went to Ole Miss. She got an engineering degree.
Wow.
And her dad basically described a fun young woman who just set her mind on something and got it and really just, enjoyed life and tried to make the most of it. And they're having a hard time wrapping their mind around the fact that one day she was fine and the next day she's not. She's dead.
Right.
And here's a quote from Marty Ellington. He said, "We want answers. We haven't been given answers. If it's a mistake, it was a mistake, but it doesn't bring my daughter back. I don't want his money. I don't want anything. All I want is an answer because I think that we owe that to my daughter." End quote. Now, according to Ellington, Ben Brown told them he had been performing several procedures on Hillary in his office late on the afternoon of November 21st when she started to have seizures and went into cardiac arrest. And in a social media post from November 24th, Brown was sharing his feelings about what was going on. Of course, he, certainly seemed devastated. And he said, quote, in this post, "We need prayers for a miracle. Hillary had a cardiac arrest on Tuesday afternoon. We called 911 and started CPR. Her heart came back, but her brain is not doing well. She has been in a coma since she went unconscious on Tuesday. Hillary Ellington Brown, you are my soulmate, my world, my everything. Please come back. Please." And the post was accompanied by the praying hands emoji and dozens of pictures of Hillary Brown. And these have actually gotten quite a bit of media attention on social media as well as in the press. Most of the pictures are of just her, with him or her with her children. But there are some that make you scratch your head a little bit. There's one with her with her dog, and you can see where he's used the graphics to create a heart around her face with an arrow that points to one of her breasts, which is, she's got a lovely shirt on and there's some cleavage there. So, and it's pointing to that. And I think, if you're a plastic surgeon, you're bound to be proud of your work to a certain extent. But it was just an odd picture.
Yeah, it wasn't
in some ways.
Wasn't professional, and it was a little bit, just creepy to me. I mean, because it was just thrown in there with the others, and there were some other pictures too that I was just like, I can't believe that he chose these to put there, because I saw the pictures of her before she had any of the plastic surgery, and she was lovely. Her hair was lighter. She had a beautiful heart-shaped face. Her eyes were pretty and twinkly. She even had on a little dress and with a little tie around the waist. Her figure was awesome.
Yes.
I mean,
cute.
yeah,
Beautiful.
I mean, and they say she was petite, like less than 5 feet tall.
Yes.
So, I mean, she's just a little bitty thing, but, this is what happens. That's what I'm talking about, like with the behavior. When people think behavior doesn't apply to them that, it's standard practice in almost any of the disciplines in healthcare to not serve thyself or serve thy family. That's like me filling prescriptions for my family.
And those are some of the questions I want to get answered because the American Medical Association federally is like, absolutely not. You shouldn't be performing on your family. In Florida, it's kind of like, we wouldn't really recommend it, but I don't know that we're going to do anything about it. I mean, that's not what they wrote, but that's kind of how I took it when I read it.
That's how it is interpreted. I don't think it's illegal. It is some people would say, it's unethical.
Yes.
And our ethics are what we draw ourselves. Nobody can create your ethics for you. No one can create mine for me. But that is why we have peers, and that is why we have other people in our professions. Hopefully, they can come to us and go, you're kind of practicing outside the lines there, coloring outside the lines. And I would think normal people would receive that well. But some people won't, because we've gotten to where our personalities, we have no problem-solving skills. We can't take feedback from people. We want to be the best and bigger, better deal of everything. I mean, come on, let's just live. Let's just be happy in our bodies and live our life. I understand plastic surgery. I get it. And if people want it, I'm all for it. I'll probably have it at some point in my life.
Right. But do your research.
Yeah, exactly. But I mean, the thing is that if something doesn't feel right, and I think that's what a lot of the ladies that came to you on interviews was like, I just didn't feel right, or something was weird about that, or the office was always chaos, or it was a different bunch of folks in there every time I went. He was hollering at her, or this, that, and the other. That's not professional. And sometimes that's an indication of maybe something else going on, maybe some misuse of medications or stress or what have you. But we cannot live in the wild, wild west and let people be practicing on people's bodies.
Absolutely. Because, the medical practice at this point, you would certainly hope that they were professionally prepared to put somebody under.
Right.
And like I said, there are a lot of questions. What are the rules and regulations? What procedures should he have been allowed to perform there? What were he not? So along those lines, he called 911 around 4:15. And according to the documentation that I got from the Santa Rosa Sheriff's Office, the call note stated that a female was in cardiac arrest, and they'd made a note that the doctor had possibly over-medicated the patient. So again, this is all under review. We really don't know what happened. I'm just telling you what the report said and they indicated. But the deputy wrote, I interviewed the medical technician, name redacted, who advised that the patient is Hillary E. Rogers Brown, who is currently Dr. Brown's spouse. Hillary Brown was in the process of several surgical procedures when she experienced several seizures and then went into cardiac arrest. And this is according to what the deputy on the scene wrote in the report. And in talking to other people that were associated with that incident, they basically have, who knew the receptionist, also talking to the father. He said that there was a young woman that was there, but she was a girl Friday, if you will. She was the babysitter. She was an assistant to them, a personal assistant, that she was also a receptionist. And I'm not clear, and I'll need to clarify this, but she may have some sort of basic medical license. But from what I'm understanding, and again, this is still a learning curve for me, you need to have a professional anesthesiologist if you're going to be putting someone under. You need to have, professional nurses who can participate if something were to go wrong and also be there to serve different purposes depending on the procedure. I know there's different people that are required for different procedures, but whatever the procedure he was doing on her, it would seem that the receptionist slash babysitter slash, technician maybe perhaps was not the best trained person for that particular event if she were to seize and have a cardiac arrest, which is what happened.
Yeah. And I mean, also in all that, you've got to, when there's a crisis like that, you've got to call 911. You've got to administer CPR. And CPR for any length of time, if you're doing it right, is exhausting. And you basically have to, that's what we're all taught. When you have to drop to your knees and start doing CPR, you start giving instructions. You say, you call 911. You don't just go, somebody call 911. And somebody needs to, because a seizure, and we don't know exactly what the medicines were. He said that she was awake during that. It was probably some sort of numbing agent, and there's all different kinds of that, but that numbing agent can get to a toxicity too that could cause the cardiac arrest and the seizures. And then what comes after that is hypoxia, or a very low flow of oxygen to the brain. Our brain can't go that long without oxygen and not have some damage. So I just can't imagine anybody doing any surgery or procedure without having that plan, not just the plan, in their bone marrow. This is what we do. Even at the pharmacy, when there's a seizure or someone's cut or this, that, and the other, we have procedures that we do because the chaos is not helpful.
Yeah, no, I can't even imagine. I mean, it's stressful enough if there is an emergency, much less dealing with chaotic surroundings and not having what you need to deal with it. And that's what the dad is concerned about. So basically what he told me is that, she was taken off life support because there was such severe swelling in her brain. And, indications were that perhaps she'd gone without oxygen for anywhere 30 to 45 minutes, somewhere in that range. And so that's one of those questions that he wants answered. At what point was EMS called? How long did he try to do CPR? Or was he successful at it? So he just has a lot of questions. What led to that? And there was not a crash cart, according to him, on the scene. And I know you're familiar with a crash cart, but for those who may not be, it's basically a piece of medical equipment that has a lot of life-saving tools on it, everything from oxygen to paddles, to gloves and supplies and that sort of thing, right? So but there was not one of those available.
Right, and that's exactly what it infers, a crash cart. Things have crashed. We need to do life-saving measures now. And, I think about that happening like that. I'm sure that everybody was scared during the process.
Of course, it'd be horrifying.
Right, and I don't know how close it was for the EMTs to get there or what happened, so it's just one of those things that you're just like, let's don't set ourselves up for this. Because surgery centers, think about this. Joan Rivers, about 10 years ago, about like right now,
yes,
same thing happened with her. She was on the operating table because her voice box, she had that raspy voice, and it was getting raspier.
It was unmistakable.
Right,
yes.
right. And she liked it like that. She's kind of a raucous lady. And so that was hurting her, and she was having trouble swallowing, so her esophagus was messed up too. So they were just going to send a little scope down her throat to check out her voice box and her esophagus. Okay. And she's a celebrity. So there was a Dr. Cohen and a Dr. Coravin. And Dr. Coravin's the doctor to the stars out there, the throat doctor to the stars. And there was something in there that something was going weird or wrong at a surgery center. She's not at the hospital. At a surgery center, that if something happens, they have to get to the hospital for emergency. So what happened there was my dad calls it grab ass, when people are playing grab ass in the OR or something like that. They were taking pictures of her unconscious, and each doctor blamed the other one, because I remember that being a big thing. And I think, how come y'all are doing that? Do you need to be told that's unprofessional? Do you need to be told that's not right or good? So basically, Joan Rivers, the same thing happened to her. Cardiac arrest and hypoxia to her brain. And then, it was an elective surgery, just like this was elective for Hillary. I know she never dreamt of getting up on that table and thought that she would not be going home to dinner with her children.
Yeah, that's a nightmare.
It is. And especially right here at Christmas, this is a hard time for my family too. But Hillary's family, right where they are right now, was the hardest time of my life. I didn't know who to talk to. A lot of people couldn't take what I was saying because it's so horrible. And we were still grieving, just like they are, waiting on autopsies, when to bury Sharon. It was the holidays and the legal system's in it. It is a piping hot mess. And the grief, sorrow, and loss that you feel during this is, you cannot process it. It's just hard to process.
Yeah, I know. And then again, with all the questions that he has, like, what I think he did tell me that she did like for him to perform these procedures on her.
Mm.
And so that was something that he actually would tell her, like, I feel like you look good as you are. You're beautiful. Please don't put yourself through this. What more can you possibly do? But it was something that she enjoyed and she enjoyed her relationship with him, although by his account and other people that I've talked to as well, there was some turmoil and could potentially, what some would say is toxic. There might be some, matches of personality, if you will. They would have some significant fights, I guess, is what people would describe in the office, out of the office. But, they were also a new couple. I'm sure there's like growing pains, but there's, we're not here to speculate. It's just to tell you what I do know, and that the dad said that they had their ups and downs, and their police reports bear that out. She had attempted suicide, according to Ben Brown, back in March. He called because she had left letters for him and the children saying she was going to commit suicide and take an overdose of Valium. And he went home and found her, and she was unconscious. And then she came to and was just behaving erratically, he felt. And about that time, the deputy arrived, and he said that she was trying to leave in her car, and the deputy prevented her from leaving. And Ben, basically told him what was going on. And she said she was fine. She admitted to taking the Valium, but she said she really wasn't trying to hurt herself. She just wanted Ben to know that she was quote unquote serious. And I'm not sure what that meant, but that was what was in the report. And at any rate, the deputy decided that even though EMS was there and they treated her and she was fine physically, he felt like she qualified for a Baker Act. So he took her to Baptist Hospital for transport. So in that regard, there, are some, you have the documentation that there was some issues, but again, all families have issues, and sometimes, people get carried away. I don't think she really intended to die with these procedures, though, and that's what her father was saying.
Right.
How long was it before EMS was called? Why wasn't there a crash cart? Why did this have to happen? Even though he understands that it was probably something that she wanted to do, she certainly didn't want to die doing it.
No, I 100% agree. And, some of the things that can indicate that things are going south during a procedure or surgery or a treatment are the monitoring the vital signs, like heart rate, oxygen rate, pulse, things like that.
And how you're responding to medication
Right,
as well.
exactly.
Yes.
And if you took some medication before and you used a different medication than you were used to, it could be different. That's exactly what happened with Joan Rivers also. They didn't weigh her, and most medicines need to be dosed by weight, especially you're taking someone, like in Joan's case, to a twilight sleep. Or like, I can't imagine being awake while somebody's cutting on my body. I don't want to be awake.
No.
But a lot of that going on. That's why you need other people in there. You need other people in there to help you. Doing CPR by yourself is almost impossible. And that's why we need to get the EMTs there quickly, because it matters with oxygen to the brain. It just matters.
Right. You can't go without it and not expect to have some
Right.
serious repercussions. And just so we're clear, I have reached out to Ben Brown for comment and I sent him an email and he did not respond. I've also sent additional messages. But at any rate, he now has a public relations firm that he has hired, and they, are trying to help him. I guess he's essentially saying that he's grieving and sorry, but he certainly never intended for that to happen.
No,
is the long
I'm
and
sure
short
he's
of it.
grieving.
Yes.
I can't imagine what your mind thinks. It's just like when you do realize your loved one's dead, you're just like, this can't be. I mean, trust me, 10 years later, I get up sometimes in the morning, look at Sharon's picture and go, are you really dead? I mean, and I know this in my head, but it's just so incredulous. And her parents, I walked around all the time wanting to know why.
Yeah.
And, I had to go away for about 90 days to go through a program of grief, trauma, and loss, because it's the same type of behavior as if you are in addiction, that kind of thinking and that kind of you need help. Recovery is a beautiful thing, and grief will kill you.
Yes.
So what
Die of a broken heart.
Exactly, as my mother did of Takasubo, and my dad had seizures and strokes right after. During this time right now that Hillary's family's in, this is when my dad had seizures and strokes because he just couldn't
The pain of it all.
He just watched the day before put his baby girl in the ground forever, and he felt like I should have been able to help her or stop it. It's just the way our minds think.
I know. And then when I was talking to Marty Ellington, he said something similar. He's like, I just want to be able to provide answers. He said, I'm going to have to, all my family members, her children, they're all going to be coming to me for years and say what happened. And he goes, and I'm the dad. I need to be able to tell them.
And dads feel like that. And I see it and I know it, and my heart hurts for her parents and her family and her children and relatives and stuff. It's just a hard time right now, but you still have to do these dutiful things like have a wake, have a funeral, then there's getting the death certificates and dealing with things like that.
Yes.
It goes on and on and on. And even if someone told me why, that's what, when I went away to the therapy, even if someone told me why, it finally snapped in my head that it's not going to be a good enough reason because she's still not here.
I know. But it's just those levels of grief and those levels of dealing with it and facing it and becoming real to you. But this case has certainly taken on a life of its own in the community. A lot of people have been following it on social media and various pages. And his post about Hillary being in the coma, some people were on there basically saying, what happened and starting to criticize maybe his response or at least question what happened. And he did respond to some of that. And, publicly he said it was not after hours. We were not alone. She was wide awake with numbing medicine. Y'all, please stop. So that post has since been taken down. It's no longer there. I think for the most part, people are paying close attention. They want to see what will come of this death investigation. It's going to be a while. It's a joint investigation with the Santa Rosa Sheriff's Office Major Crime Unit, as well as the medical examiner. And that process is just going to take a long time. Part of it's just a toxicology overhaul, so they're going to wait on those tests. And they're not releasing any information. And a death investigation is also procedural. It's part of the deal when there's an unusual death or just something out of the norm. It doesn't necessarily mean that anything wrong has happened. But there are, again, a lot of questions. This is an unusual situation. A surgical-related death is not your average, everyday sort of event that law enforcement around here investigates. So, I think that people are just fascinated by all of it on multiple levels. The fact that it was a beautiful woman and she was a surgeon's wife and he was the one performing and they had a volatile relationship according to friends and family. So there's a lot of rumor, a lot of speculation, but I think it's also important to remember that, like you said, these are grieving people, these are hurting families, they're trying to figure out what's going on. These answers will come forward. It may not happen in the time that we all want them to, and certainly not as quickly as the family may want them to. But it's also important, as you know, to be vigilant, because when you are dealing with death and you are dealing with the justice system at the same time, and you are dealing with the reality of grieving and like you said, death certificates, there's the business of death, there's handling so many loose ends, and it's hard to find time to even cry, much less take care of all the business. But when you're dealing with the justice system, it is important to stay on top of it and gather information and talk to people and understand what's happening, because the next thing you know, there could be a result that you didn't want.
Right. You have to advocate for your loved one and yourself.
Not to say that you can affect the outcome, but it's important to make your voice heard.
Exactly. And, the grieving, I've never been called weird more times in my life than I have in the last 10 years. You put all the other 54 years ahead of that. Because when you grieve, you're weird. You can't help it. You don't know. It doesn't make sense. None of it makes sense. But your loved one is still gone. And what haunts me is what haunts a lot of people. The time when you hear about your loved one. A lady called me basically and said, Pam, don't say anything, just listen. Sharon's dead and Brandon killed her. I will never forget that. And then I will never forget what my mind was processing. What might Sharon's last breath or her thoughts or her motions would have been. It tortures me. But I have to process that and walk that out. That's why I go into therapy. That's why having a counselor. That's why I go into grief share. That's why sharing with trusted others. Believe me, folks like Hillary's parents and my family, this hopefully will be the worst thing that's ever happened. And you're going to learn a whole lot of new things. And you're going to see some people that you thought that could hang with you during something like this can't, and new people will pop up. It's just one foot in front of the other.
Absolutely. Yes. And for the community as well. We're all
Right.
waiting for answers and wanting to see, and a lot of people that support both of them and want
Mhm.
to see answers and want to see peace. And some people don't like all the attention that this case is getting. Some people do. They do feel like there's something fishy about it. Others, like I said, there's just a lot of, it's one of those cases that there's so many layers in the minds of people that they are fascinated. They can't look away. So we are all certainly hoping for answers soon. But one thing is for certain, I think most people can agree that their hearts go out to her children and to his children. He also had two sons by a previous marriage. She has three young children. They're going to go live with their father in Oxford, Mississippi, where the family is originally from, Hillary Brown's family. So, certainly prayers for those children. We want them to get as much healing and the family love focused on them as possible, which I think is certainly their plan. But at any rate, any final thoughts about this case? We're going to follow it. I will have more reports coming, especially I've talked to a lot of women again who say that they've experienced tremendous pain from some of these, and botched procedures is how they would call them. So I'm, again, this is a story that's developing, but there will be more on that. Pam, as we wrap up, any final thoughts for you on this case?
I would think that we need to be gentle with one another, and that on the other side of this grief and trauma and loss is the joy that comes in the morning. And I've had to truly believe that, but otherwise, and if I didn't have the Lord in my life, I don't know that I would still be sitting here. So I think that we just have to take it slow, but we can learn something through this. And the recovery for everybody involved is what's very important.
Absolutely. Well, thank you, Pam. Those are definitely special insights. I mean, you can relate on so many levels, even down to the time of year. And we want to thank you for joining us as well. And I'll leave you with this quote from Mr. Ellington talking about his daughter and the community support that he felt like he'd found when he came here to the Gulf Breeze, Pensacola area. He said, quote, "I want to thank everybody fighting for her. The problem I have is I don't get answers. And for the rest of their life, I've got friends and family and their children asking me why. Because I'm the father, I'm supposed to have an answer, and I can't get anybody to give me an answer." Well, that is it for Beauty Buyer Beware. Thank you so much for joining us for this episode of Gulf Coast Confidential. We are going to continue to follow this developing story, and we'll continue to bring you updates just as soon as we get them. I'm your host, writer, and producer, Molly Barrows, with co-host and researcher Pam Hill. And a big thanks, as always, to director, editor, and production engineer James Roy. You can listen to more Gulf Coast Confidential conversations wherever you listen to your favorite podcast as well. And of course, don't forget to watch on the Gulf Coast Confidential YouTube channel and like and subscribe. We'll see you next time.